Usually when you sit down to engage with a fantasy setting,
Yeah.
there is this very comfortable, highly structured, shared language.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
Yeah.
kind of have your expectations dialed in, right? Like you open a heavy oak door in a dungeon, you see a goblin, the wizard casts a fireball.
Right, and the game master calculates the damage. It's
Yeah.
it's a very predictable ecology of magic and monsters.
Exactly. I'm your host, and today we're jumping right into this.
And I am the resident expert for this deep dive.
Yeah.
And yeah, that traditional setting, it's entirely built on a shared vocabulary. We inherently want our imaginary worlds to be, neatly categorized.
Visible and governed by rules we already understand.
Precisely.
But in 1980, an adventure module called Expedition to the Barrier Peaks basically took that comfortable rulebook and just threw it into a localized structural collapse.
That's one way to put it. It really did.
It's wild. We are looking at a narrative landscape here that is terrifyingly alien, specifically because it weaponizes the player's own genre expectations against them.
Yeah, it uses what you know to hurt you.
Right. So today, we are taking a deep dive into an archival dossier covering this legendary module. It was designated S3 for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons.
Module S3, yeah, the classic.
And our mission today is to explore how forcing medieval knights to confront malfunctioning police robots created this massive cultural touchstone.
It completely rewired the evolution of interactive storytelling, really.
It did. Game design mechanics, world building, everything. So what are we really looking at here?
Well, we're dissecting a masterclass in what happens when designers intentionally break the foundational rules of their own genre.
Break them in half, yeah.
Exactly. It is a massive disruption of the tabletop space that just forced an entire industry to reconsider how they build environments.
So let's look at how this disruption actually begins. Because the setup is, highly conventional.
Oh, it's as standard as it gets.
Right. You are in the Grand Duchy of Jeff, a totally standard fantasy realm. The local duke hires a party of highly capable adventurers to head up into the craggy mountains.
Just to investigate an influx of strange, aggressive creatures. Typical Tuesday for a night?
Literally. Up to this point, the players are operating entirely within their comfort zone. They expect to hike up a mountain, find a carved stone entrance,
And clear out a cavern full of traditional fantasy antagonists. Orcs, goblins, whatever.
except they don't find a cave. The dossier details how a recent earthquake has sheared away a massive section of the mountain face.
Revealing an enormous, smooth, metallic structure buried deep within the rock.
Right. And when the characters breach that hull, they realize they have walked into a gargantuan, crashed interstellar spaceship.
It's such a brilliant rug pull. The module systematically strips the characters of their foundational understanding of the universe.
And the genius here is that the overarching lore completely removes the traditional narrative structure. Like, this ship crashed centuries ago.
Yeah, the original crew wasn't defeated in some epic battle. They were entirely eradicated by an extraterrestrial pathogen.
So there's no villain waiting in a throne room.
None. There is no Dark Lord to defeat, no monologue to listen to.
Which means the monsters the Duke sent them to hunt are just, escaped biological specimens.
Yeah, from the ship's ecological containment decks. Botanical gardens, zoological labs, that kind of thing.
Right, because with the crew dead and the automated systems failing over centuries, these alien specimens broke out.
There established a brutal, enclosed food chain inside the ship.
And the dossier highlights this incredibly bleak detail that I just love.
Oh, the swimming pool.
Yes. During the plague-induced madness before the crew finally succumbed, some technician dumped a laboratory aquarium full of alien specimens into the ship's recreational swimming pool.
Just out of sheer madness. And over the centuries, one of those microscopic specimens survived and mutated.
Into this massive, lethal organism called the Eye of the Deep.
Exactly. It turned a brightly lit, place of leisure into a stagnant aquatic death trap.
It perfectly illustrates the tonal shift. I mean, it is like dropping a medieval peasant into a modern nuclear submarine with the lights off.
That's a great analogy.
Every single surface is a threat, because nothing makes conceptual sense to the intruder. The magical wands they think they are looting from the dead
Are actually lethal radiation emitters.
Right. Suits of magical plate armor are actually powered exoskeletons requiring power cells.
The antagonist of this story is the environment itself. The horror is derived from the sheer banality of the disaster.
Yeah, like encountering the malfunctioning police robots.
Oh man, those robots. They're blindly enforcing obsolete laws upon medieval intruders.
They will use deadly force simply because a wizard failed to present the correct plastic ID badge to a sensor array.
Because the robots aren't evil. They're just executing a degraded line of code.
But that raises a massive mechanical problem, though. Let's unpack this. How do you actually play through that scenario?
That is the big question.
Because you, the person sitting at the table, know perfectly well what a laser rifle is. But
Yeah.
your character thinks it's just a weird metal wand with a glass eye on the end.
Right. You cannot just let the player declare, I shoot the laser.
Right, so how do you stop that?
Well, solving that specific metagame friction is what forced the game's creators, Gary Gygax and Rob Kuntz, to invent entirely new, highly procedural mechanics.
Which sounds like a headache.
It was definitely controversial. They had to simulate the character's total ignorance and the extreme physical danger of experimenting with advanced technology through trial and error.
Which brings us to the artifact identification flowcharts.
Yes, the infamous flowcharts.
Because the characters lack any conceptual framework for what a machine is, the dungeon master has to track their actions through a series of complex, branching flowcharts whenever they try to interact with an item.
The players are forced to make blind decisions. Push a toggle, twist a dial, pull a lever.
It is a simulation of pure scientific deduction mixed with, basically, Russian roulette.
Yeah, it really is.
The charts are littered with skull and crossbones icons denoting severe injury or instant death.
The mechanics for figuring out how to fire a laser rifle are absurdly specific. Like you have to slip your forearm into the casing, allow the internal plates to contract, and squeeze the grip.
But to actually aim it, you also have to be wearing a specific mesh hood.
And a pair of glasses that project a ghost-like targeting image from the rifle's camera directly into your field of vision.
And if a player fails to sequence those actions correctly,
The flowchart dictates harsh consequences. The laser might shoot backward directly into the character's face,
yikes.
or the power cell might suffer an explosive short circuit.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, but maybe a bit frustrating. I understand the desire to simulate that dangerous learning curve, but from a player's perspective,
Yeah,
doesn't rolling percentile dice over and over just to figure out how to open a sci-fi thermos absolutely kill the narrative pacing?
oh, absolutely.
It feels like mechanical tedium could overshadow the tension of exploring the ship. Does it ruin the fun?
You're hitting on a core historical debate regarding this module. Proponents of the era loved the concrete, granular way it handled abstract problem solving.
They liked the caution it demanded.
Right, it demanded extreme caution. But detractors felt exactly as you do, that it brought the momentum to a screeching halt.
So why do it?
Well, to understand why these flowcharts were so prominent, we have to look at TSR's broader business strategy at the time. This module was heavily engineered as a cross-promotional primer.
Oh, so TSR had other product lines they wanted to push.
Precisely. They published dedicated science fiction tabletop games like Metamorphosis Alpha and Gamma World.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, the flowcharts in S3 were heavily inspired by the mechanics in those sci-fi properties. By forcing D&D players to engage with these highly specific percentile dice systems within the safety of their familiar fantasy setting.
They were essentially running a Trojan horse tutorial.
Exactly. They were lowering the barrier to entry for their other product lines, training fantasy players in the mechanics of a totally different genre.
That's pretty clever. But okay, the flowcharts simulated the danger of using the technology, but the designers still had to solve the problem of navigating the ship itself.
Right, the movement restrictions.
Yeah. Because without magical wards or wooden doors to pick, they had to figure out how to restrict a fantasy character's movement in a sterile metallic environment.
And they accomplished it through a strict hierarchy of colored plastic access cards.
Oh, I love this part.
So good. In doing so, S3 pioneered what video gamers today refer to as Metroidvania-style exploration. They completely translated that concept into the tabletop space.
The progression is meticulously gated, like an orange card grants access to basic security areas.
But you need a red card for high security zones.
And to obtain one of those, the players have to physically pry them out of the chest compartments of the disabled police robots.
And the mechanics dictate a high probability of destroying the delicate plastic card during the extraction.
Just to make it harder.
Always. But the ultimate prize is the gray command card, which grants total access.
Which is only found alongside the jumbled bones of the ship's deceased captain.
And even if the players locate the captain's remains, The game engine dictates they only have a 5 to 20% chance of actually spotting the gray card amidst the surrounding debris.
That is brutal. It forces players to continuously backtrack.
Oh, constantly.
Once they scavenge a higher tier card, they have to navigate back through sprawling, heavily populated decks to unlock previously impenetrable doors they passed hours ago.
It turns the entire physical structure of the ship into a massive interconnected puzzle box.
It really does.
And this specific friction, the tension between the tedious simulation of the flowcharts and the brilliant nonlinear puzzle design of the keycards, it perfectly mirrors the explosive transitional state of TSR Hobbies as a company in 1980.
Because the dossier notes that TSR was undergoing massive corporate growth.
Huge growth.
By 1982, they were hitting $20 million in sales and launching the Role Playing Game Association.
They were rapidly shifting from a localized garage operation into an international corporate entity.
And the underlying design philosophy of the industry was transitioning just as violently, wasn't it?
It really was. Historians categorize the early years of tabletop role-playing as the golden age of gonzo pulp fantasy.
Gonzo pulp fantasy.
Yeah, it was a highly permissive era. You could have a sci-fi Martian standing next to a traditional wizard.
Heavily inspired by the weird, unrestricted tales of authors like Robert E. Howard.
Exactly. There was zero demand for ecological coherence. You just threw monsters into a stone room and let the players fight them.
But the player base was maturing and their expectations were shifting.
By the early 80s, the community was entering the silver age of Gygaxian naturalism.
Gygaxian naturalism, meaning they wanted logic.
Right. Players and designers started demanding verisimilitude. Imaginary worlds needed to make logical sense. If there was a monster in a dungeon, players wanted to know what its viable food source was.
Dungeons needed to function as living, breathing ecologies.
Exactly. And Expedition to the Barrier Peaks sits exactly on the fulcrum of those two eras.
It holds on to the chaotic, unhinged spirit of the Golden Age by giving us elves firing laser pistols and robots fighting knights.
But it fully embraces the rigorous demands of the Silver Age by exhaustively explaining the underlying logic of the environment.
Right. The monsters aren't just sitting in a room waiting to be killed.
No, they are an invasive species from the ship's breached containment decks, adapting to a new biome.
It manages to bridge the chaotic creativity of the past with the structural logic demanded by the future audience. So, what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Yeah, there's a real lesson here.
If you're managing a project, writing a story, or just trying to navigate a field that's changing rapidly, S3 is a masterclass in transitional design.
It really demonstrates how to maintain the wild, creative core of an original concept while building the rigorous structural foundation that a growing, more sophisticated audience demands.
But building that structural logic created an entirely new problem for the designers, right?
Yeah.
Oh, a massive one. They were constructing a visually complex, highly logical sci-fi world for characters who completely lacked the vocabulary to describe it.
Relying on text alone was no longer sufficient.
No, because the Dungeon Master cannot just look at the players and say, you see a medical scanner.
Or you see a holographic projector. The characters wouldn't know what those words mean.
Precisely. So to solve this narrative problem, they had to revolutionize how the game was physically manufactured.
The art booklet.
Yes. The module was published with two separate booklets. One was the standard text adventure, but the second was a revolutionary 63-panel illustration booklet.
Which is so cool. The Dungeon Master could fold this booklet horizontally and vertically to display specific alien scenes to the players.
Completely isolating the image without spoiling the dungeon maps or the text of the secret doors printed on the adjacent pages.
The tactile nature of this booklet was a mechanical necessity for pacing. Handing a player a stark illustration of a strange metal tube with a wire attached
Was infinitely more effective than spending 10 minutes trying to verbally describe a piece of 25th century technology to someone role-playing a 12th century knight.
It forced the players to use their own eyes and deduce the function of the object visually.
And the visual aesthetic of that booklet is legendary.
Oh yeah, Earl Otis.
Earl Otis provided the cover art and the centerfolds, utilizing this bizarre, hallucinatory, almost psychedelic, weird fiction style.
But what is truly fascinating to me is how some of the visual elements were organically integrated into the game's lore. The origins of some of these creatures didn't come from high-concept world building.
No, they came from the absolute cheapest available resources.
Tell me about the booklet.
Okay, so the bullet makes a memorable appearance in this module, casually being tossed out of a ship hatch by a loader robot.
It's basically a massive, heavily armored land shark.
Right, but when the TSR designers originally needed new monsters for playtesting, they didn't commission elaborate concept art.
They just reached into a bag of cheap toys.
Exactly.
Hmm.
A bag of cheap, plastic dinosaur toys, manufactured in Hong Kong, that they used as tabletop miniatures. They literally designed the ecology of one of the game's most iconic, terrifying monsters, based entirely on the anatomical inaccuracies of a cheap plastic toy.
That's amazing. There is also the entry on the bunyoid.
Oh, the bunyoid trap.
Yes. Players navigate into a room, and the text describes a cute, harmless-looking rabbit creature with velvety horns just sitting placidly on a stump.
And the players visually process this as non-threatening.
Right. But wait, the dossier says it's a trap.
It is a classic mechanism designed to punish naive players.
Hmm.
The bunny is actually a bioluminescent lure attached to the head of a much larger, highly aggressive subterranean predator.
Wow.
Yeah, it functions exactly like the glowing lure of an anglerfish, weaponizing the player's assumption of safety.
That's so devious. But you know, the visual history of the module also highlights a wild disconnect in the publishing standards of the time. Let's talk about the cover.
The famous cover art.
The monster featured prominently on the iconic cover of the game, this massive, green, eight-tentacled horror engaged in combat with the adventurers, does not actually exist anywhere in the text of the adventure.
Right. It highlights a stark difference in brand management. Today, we expect absolute corporate brand cohesion. Every piece of key art is vetted to match the text perfectly.
But in 1980,
In 1980, it was incredibly common for an artist to paint a generic, highly evocative scene that captured the vibe of the module without strictly adhering to the specific encounters written in the text.
the archivists note that the closest creature in the module is a vampire thornvine.
But the monster on the cover very clearly has octopus suckers, not thorns.
It's just wild to think about. That lack of strict corporate cohesion in the early days allowed for a certain kind of atmospheric storytelling, though.
It did, and that's exactly what allowed Expedition to the Barrier Peaks to leave a massive, enduring legacy.
The concept of a crashed spaceship, irrevocably altering a fantasy landscape, became a permanent fixture in the genre.
You can see its structural DNA decades later in Paizo's Pathfinder setting.
Oh, right, specifically the nation of Numeria, which is an entire region defined by barbarian tribes scavenging super science weaponry from a localized crash site.
It also birthed one of the most enduring fan theories in the tabletop community.
The Mind Flayer theory. I love this one.
Me too. So during the exploration of the ship, players can encounter an illithid, or mind flayer. The illustration accompanying the encounter shows the mind flayer wielding scavenged high-tech weaponry.
Because the ship is canonically extraterrestrial, it sparked this decades-long theory that mind flayers aren't native to the fantasy ecosystem at all.
Right. The theory posits they are actually transdimensional alien refugees who arrived on the planet via crashed ships, exactly like this one.
Which fundamentally changes how you view the entire ecology of the game's monsters. But looking at how modern design philosophy attempts to update this legacy reveals a lot about how audiences have changed.
It does. Fast forward to 2024.
Right, a conversion of S3 was released as part of the Quest from the Infinite Staircase anthology, and the modern designers made a highly controversial narrative change.
They added a character named Aphelion.
A sentient artificial intelligence program to act as the central narrative villain. Aphelion actively directs the robots and engages the players in conversation.
It's a complete departure from the original tone. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 1980 module lacked a villain, because the tragedy had already concluded centuries before the players arrived.
The players were simply surviving the ecological aftermath of a dead world.
Exactly. But modern narrative design heavily prioritizes player agency and dramatic negotiation. Contemporary players generally expect an active antagonist.
Someone they can converse with, reason with, or dramatically defeat in a climax. But I have to question what is lost in that translation.
You think it softens it?
Well, yeah. Doesn't replacing the existential dread of a dead, uncaring machine with a chatty AI villain kind of soften the isolationist horror of the original?
It definitely changes the flavor.
Because the brilliance of the 1980 version was the sheer tragedy of technological hubris. A microscopic pathogen wiped out this absolute pinnacle of scientific achievement, and the automated cleaning robots are still just buffing the floor over the bones of their creators.
It's haunting.
It is. Giving the ship a face in the form of an AI gives the players an easy target. It makes the alien environment feel entirely too familiar.
I agree. It translates an experience of raw environmental survival into a much more traditional, hero-centric narrative. It is a perfect encapsulation of how the lens through which we view interactive storytelling has shifted over 40 years.
We're significantly less comfortable with arbitrary, uncaring environments.
We desire curated, character-driven conflict where our actions have direct conversational impact on the antagonist.
So the horror evolved. In the 80s, the horror was our total insignificance in the face of a cold, mechanical universe. Today, we want our horror to have a face so we can negotiate with it.
Or punch it.
Ha, or punch it. Exactly. The underlying mechanics of narrative satisfaction have changed just as much as the rules of the game itself.
It's fascinating.
It really is. So if we synthesize this whole journey, it is remarkable to see how a single adventure module forced an entire player base to unlearn their genre expectations.
It pioneered tactile visual mechanics to solve pacing issues at the table.
It essentially invented the tabletop Metroidvania through its access card gating.
And it forced an entire industry to debate the boundaries between gonzo creativity and rigorous world building.
It proved that the mechanical framework of a game could be robust enough to handle infinite narrative permutations.
It challenged the community to redefine what the word fantasy could actually encompass.
I know you always have a lingering thought for us to mull over as we wrap up. What did this dossier leave you with?
Well, we established that the original ship in this module was brought down by an extraterrestrial pathogen. It was a failed experiment in exploration that crashed and was buried in the rock for centuries.
Right.
But if this module popularized the theory that foundational traditions of the genre, like the Mind Flayer, might actually just be alien refugees from crashes exactly like this one,
Yeah.
it prompts a much broader question for you, the listener. How many fundamental rules or deeply held traditions in your own industry, your own workplace, or your own specific field
Are actually just the surviving remnants of a forgotten, crashed experiment from decades ago?
exactly? The procedures we accept as absolute law might just be broken technology we forgot how to originally use.
Wow.
It always pays to aggressively question the ecology of your own environment.
That is a powerful thought. When we started this deep dive, we talked about the comfort of a precise rulebook, the safety of knowing exactly what to expect when you open a door.
And S3 took that door off its hinges.
It really did. Hopefully, looking at the legacy of this module has convinced you that sometimes the most significant leaps in innovation happen when you let the earthquake shatter the mountain, walk into the dark, and realize you have absolutely no idea what you're looking at.
Here, here.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Stay curious, keep questioning the mechanics of your world, and keep exploring.